Gum lesson number 9 this week is going to kick off the beginning of a series of videos where we talk about comma usage. And so this is part 1, commas. What can we say about commas? When we read sentences or when you write sentences, some of you get it, some of you don't. And I think part of the reason commas are such a trouble for many students is because you've heard so many different things. So we want to kind of cut all of those other things out and we want to get down to the brass tacks. We want to get down to the stuff that matters and what's going to make comma usage easiest. So first of all, you probably heard this somewhere. Every time you breathe, that's when you should use a comma. That is terrible advice. It sometimes plays out okay, but the thing is that we don't often pay attention to our breathing. And so when we start to pay attention to it, we catch all of these different places where we're pausing or not pausing, and you have too many commas or not enough commas. It just doesn't work. Part of the reason for that is because there are some pretty rigid rules when we talk about comma usage. At the same time, though, with all of those rigid rules that we have, there's all kinds of flexibility. So sentences, even though we say that a sentence should have a subject, a verb, and an object, we move those things around. We do it because it's interesting to the reader, it's interesting to us, and we don't always want to sound like we're in the second grade. So how do we get through all of that variety and all of those unusual circumstances where commas are used? Well, there are kind of 5 major areas where we use commas. So when we look at these in the next few videos, we're going to kind of break them down into more manageable sections. So you're going to kind of check and you're going to quiz on each of these little sections, and we want to try to bring all of this stuff together to make sure that when you're writing, you are using commas correctly. So the first one is going to be probably a review for some of you, but it may be new territory for others, and that is coordinating conjunctions. So here we go. Without further ado, let's get into commas part 1, connecting 2 independent clauses. This is something that we talked about before. We said a clause is a sentence. So we have 2 types of sentences that we use. We have an independent clause, which is a complete sentence. So we have a subject and a verb. In the example that we have here, it's Juniper wears. In a dependent clause, it's a sentence element. So it's not complete, but it's part of a sentence. There's some additional information there, but it can't stand alone. So even though we have a subject, she, and a verb, goes, there's this other word at the beginning of this sentence which kind of throws the whole thing off, and that's the word because. So if we get rid of the word because, we have 2 independent clauses. And these 2 independent clauses are maybe related, and we want to connect them. So to connect these similar ideas, that's where we're going to use commas. So listen to this. Coordinating conjunctions, there's only 7 of them. And we call them the FANBOYS. It's kind of a fun little name, but it's an easy acronym for remembering them. So it's for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. Okay? Take a second and repeat them. Okay, so now that you've repeated them, repeat them several more times to try to get them in your memory, because those 7 words are gold for connecting 2 sentences together. So if we have 2 separate sentences and we want to connect them, we can use any one of these words depending on what we're trying to say, and it will connect them. So I can say things like, Raleigh keeps trying to win, yet he continues to fail. So the word in yellow there, that's my fanboy. And then of course, Raleigh and he, those are my subjects, and then keeps and continues, those are my verbs. So I've taken these 2 very separate sentences, I've connected them together, I used the word yet, and you notice that there's that comma right there before yet. Now here's the thing though, is that if I drop the word he, these things are still connected, we're still talking about Raleigh. So I say Raleigh keeps trying to win, yet continues to fail. In this case, because I don't have a subject, I don't have the word he, I don't need a comma. So the key to connecting these 2 independent sentences, these independent clauses, is that we have to have a subject and a verb in both halves of the sentence. If we don't, we can still use a fanboy, we just don't need to use a comma. See? No comma. Now here's the thing, is that when I was at NICC, after high school, we had an instructor who talked about comma splices. And he had this little saying, he'd say, comma splice, not nice. So he said, if you're trying to connect two independent clauses without a fanboy, that's what we call a comma splice. So, for example, Uncle Hank drove his car into Mud Lake last week. He lost his insurance. Now, these things sound good together. The thing is, though, is that a comma won't do the job. It's not strong enough. So here's where things get nuts. You have 4 different options to choose from. The first one is to do what we've already done, to put in a fanboy. So you'll see there in that first sentence, we have a comma followed by the word and. So last week, comma, and he lost his insurance. In the second sentence, we strengthened up that comma and we just went ahead and threw in a period. So Uncle Hank accidentally drove his car into Mud Lake last week. He lost his insurance. Okay? It's okay to do this every once in a while, but if we do this with every single independent clause that we have, our writing gets boring in a hurry. Another option to kind of throw out there is that we can have a semicolon, which is kind of like the halfway point between a comma and a period. So the 2 independent clauses need to be connected to each other in some way. So the he in that second sentence is Uncle Hank, so that connects it. Then we can use a semicolon there. All right? Or the last option we have is we can say Uncle Hank accidentally drove his car into Mud Lake last week and lost his insurance. And again, because we don't have he in front of and, we don't need a comma. So there's a lot to process here. Again, 7 words, and we can throw a comma in before it, but we have a lot of different ways of connecting 2 independent clauses together. So to review, you first of all need to ditch the old habits. Get rid of them. So quit doing that breathing rule thing. That is bad stuff. All right? The other thing, of course, too, like it says, you have 4 options, bottom line, if you're trying to connect 2 independent clauses. You can use a fanboy. You can use a semicolon, put a period in between them, or you can take out that second subject. That is how you are able to connect 2 independent clauses. And again, there's only one option there that's listed that actually uses a comma.